if you make the film you set out to make, you did it wrong. And I think that's the perfect piece of advice for any filmmaker.
Welcome to Beyond the Lens, presented by Diesel Films. I am Seth Shapiro.
And I'm AJ Speaks.
On today's show, we welcome Sarah Moshman, Emmy award-winning filmmaker, TedX speaker, and now a working mom with 2 beautiful children. A champion of female empowerment, Sarah has focused her documentary career on shining a light on impressive women, starting with the Empowerment Project, Ordinary Women Doing Extraordinary Things. And then she followed that film up with the documentary that we will discuss today, Losing Sight of Shore, where a small group of women rowed across the Pacific.
Sarah tells us how she went from working on Dancing with the Stars to directing a wonderful documentary about women rowing across the Pacific Ocean. She walks us through the point in the trip when it felt like it was all coming to an abrupt end, but how she was able to turn that moment into a positive that changed the entire direction of the film. Here is Beyond the Lens from Diesel Films.
Very exciting day today. Probably the most prolific independent filmmaker that I know. I want to welcome Sarah Moshman to Beyond the Lens. Sarah, how are you?
Good, thanks for having me. Good to see you guys.
That's a good intro, isn't it, Sarah?
I'll take it. I was like, oh, me. Okay.
So Sarah, we break this podcast into 3 acts, and the first act is your story. Where did you grow up, and how did that shape you as a kid?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Chicago area. There's a suburb called Evanston, which is where Northwestern is, and it was a great place to grow up. And my dad is a filmmaker as well, so I feel really privileged to have had that kind of around in my upbringing. It's no accident that when there's cameras around and talk of production, that it suddenly feels very natural to go into that field. So my dad certainly taught me a ton about work ethic and how to use a camera. We even had a darkroom in our basement, which for those that don't know, which sounds really creepy, where you develop black and white photographs or photographs. So I learned how to use the chemicals and how to actually create a great image when I was a teenager. So yeah, that's kind of where it all began for me. And I made my first documentary in high school when I was 16 for an English class. They assigned us a paper and I was like, I think I'm going to make a film instead, which is way more work. But I really wanted to experience the whole process of coming up with an idea, asking the questions in the interview, picking what camera angle, editing it all together, and then sharing it with an audience. So yeah, that's where it started for me. I went to film school at the University of Miami in Florida, which is a great communication school. Film school's great, not a necessity for becoming a filmmaker, especially now. It's getting more and more expensive every year. So for me, I learned so much outside of the classroom. So getting together with my friends and classmates and using the equipment and making films on the weekends. I always joke that I was in Miami and I did not get a tan. I was inside making movies, just trying every position on the set, from grip to gaffer to DP to director, producer, just trying everything. And I learned the most just by doing.
I live in Miami. I am a Canes fan. So I'm curious how you ended up picking University of Miami over Northwestern, being that you lived right in Evanston.
I mean, I tried to go to Northwestern. They did not accept me. And I'm glad they didn't, because it was good to get out and, see a different side of the country. I mean, Miami couldn't be more different than Chicago. Yeah, my parents went to Northwestern, so I certainly applied, but they were like, no, thanks. So, I wanted to go out to LA. I wanted to go to USC, UCLA, Berkeley, somewhere in California. And, life has other plans. I was a great student, but it's so competitive. I got into Boston University, Syracuse, Michigan, and Miami, and only one of those had nice weather. So I was
Listen, I envy you. I wanted to go to Syracuse and I didn't get in there. So what happened?
Yeah.
But my question to you is the experience that you had here in Miami. Were you here during the good football years? What was that experience like for you? And more directly, how did that influence you becoming the filmmaker that you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I got to be honest, I'm not a football fan at all. That's what's sort of interesting about making Losing Sight of Shore, which we will get to, is that I'm not really the director you would think to pair with this story, which ended up to kind of be my superpower. So I was at Miami 2004 to 2008, so you tell me if those were good football years. I really don't know. It was quite a trek to get to the stadium. It's not like it was right there on campus and you could just walk across the street like at Michigan. You had to like take a bus to a train and then walk. So it was like a whole to-do to go to a football game. So I probably went to like one per year.
So Sarah, I want us to step back a little bit. Most dads are, sales guys, marketing, insurance, most fathers aren't, documentary filmmakers. What was that like kind of growing up with a dad who was a documentary filmmaker, and, how did he inspire you?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of funny. It's like, I don't know any other way, but my dad was for a long time like a TV producer for the local PBS affiliate in Chicago. And he had this amazing show called Wild Chicago. So all the time he was going around the city and like meeting with crazy cool people and filming different, oddball things going on in the city. So he's always had a very like goofy, fun spirit when it comes to TV. And then in his documentaries, he focuses on like historical, often war-related topics. So he made a documentary about the Lagarto, which is a submarine that was lost off the coast of Thailand, but had originated in Wisconsin. And he just finished a documentary about the Eastland disaster, which is a very little-known event in the early 1900s in Chicago, where a boat that was set to bring like 600 people or something on like a company retreat for General Electric, it tipped over at the dock in Chicago, and 844 people died at the dock. It never even left. It was like Chicago's deadliest day. So he's really interested, I know, terrible, in stories like that are little known, historical based, often intertwined with wartime. So he's got these like kind of two buckets of his career, very like goofy, silly, interesting, oddball. Now he works on a show called Wild Travels, where he travels around the country and does like a similar spirit, interviewing interesting, different oddball things around the country. And so, yeah, I've just sort of always appreciated his work ethic. Nobody works harder than my dad. I mean, he's like totally a one person show a lot of the time. He shoots and edits and he does, sales. He does whatever he needs to do to get a project off the ground. And I think that certainly has influenced me. I love working with other people, but a lot of times you don't have the budget for it, right? You have to get a project off the ground for a certain amount of time. And it's very entrepreneurial. It's like starting a business, really. And so I've definitely learned that from him. I just really admire his tenacity, and he's in his 60s now and still making films. So I hope to do the same.
What person or what moment inspired you to champion women's rights the way that you do in a lot of your work?
Yeah, gosh, it's funny. I think about this a lot, whether there was like one turning point for me, but I think it was just this general awareness starting in college. Certainly, there weren't that many women in my film classes. And then even when there's just this socialized element that happens, right? When there's few women and lots of men in a room, or, it's just like, it'd be like, who wants to direct this? And it would just be so much harder for me to be like, me, it's just like, we're socialized to be like, oh no, that's cool. Like you do you, or like, I'm here to support you. Or it's really hard to be like, I want to be the director, in front of all these guys. And even just in the equipment room at my school, like it was just, you never saw women in there being like, I would like to rent a camera. It just was like that. Those messages are perpetuated over and over and over again. And then you start to feel like, do I belong here? Am I not supposed to be here? When there's so few of you represented behind the camera. And then I would say getting into like the Hollywood machine, if you will, working in reality TV for several years, you just start to realize like how this business really operates and how the media operates in terms of its lack of representation of women, of people of color, of otherness, any kind of otherized experience. And so when I was about 25, I started to think about, gosh, why is it that every movie I'm paying to go see in the theater or turning on the TV to watch or opening up magazines, listening to the radio, why is this, I'm getting the same messages over and over again, that my stories don't matter, that I'm not reflected back to me in our media, that women in general are over-sexualized, objectified, or ignored altogether. It just felt like there was this continuous messaging coming at me. And once you turn that awareness on, it's really hard to turn it off. And so in 2013, when I started to kind of pivot towards my own projects, that was really my greatest passion and motivation, was how do I add to the media landscape and create more projects that I wish there was more of, that I wish I had seen when I was in middle school and high school, college, and now.
I think when it comes to women's rights within the filmmaking industry and overall, I think you've been an absolutely, incredible leader. And I just want to commend you for the work that you've done.
Thank you. It means a lot.
To me, Sarah, it's just interesting because I don't know what it's like to not raise my hand. You know what I mean? As a male, you just raise your hand and you're like, yo, I'm in. So
Right.
for you to champion those rights, I don't know. I don't have a clue what that's like. So I too applaud anybody that has to go through that and just take that risk and then, sort of go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts in any field, not just film, right? When we're talking about STEM, like science, technology, engineering, and math, the studies show it's as young as 6th grade where girls are taught that like being good at math is not a positive thing, or it's not cool to be good at math, or that girls aren't good at math. That starts so young. And I see it in terms of the film industry. I see it in adult women. I do a lot of teaching as well. I teach like workshops on how to use the camera. I wrote a book. Like I do anything I can to help aspiring female filmmakers because there's so much against us in so many ways that by the time they're actually have the courage to buy a ticket to come to my class or whatever, it's just crazy how much they've just been socialized to believe that they're inherently not good at something like holding a camera, like doing something technical. And it's like, why not? You can do this, like pick it up. Here's how you use it. It's just crazy. So it's like, not everyone's going to want to use the camera, but what an empowering tool to be able to use so that you can go out and film that first interview to get your project off the ground, right? You're not always going to have the budget to hire a cinematographer and a sound engineer and the whole crew. Yeah, it's really startling how early those messages begin for girls of what they shouldn't be doing or what they're incapable of. I mean, you guys have kids. It's like inherent in our media of like boys are being taught that their bodies are tools. They're to be used to explore, to conquer, to dominate, to run and jump and all that. And girls get some of that, but it's also like to look pretty, and it's more about our appearance, and we are to be consumed by the world rather than to conquer the world. And it's that kind of permeates in a lot of ways in every industry. So it's how do you combat those messages? Part of it is in front of the camera, certainly, but it's also who's behind the camera. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I have 2 daughters, and, you're definitely an inspiration for me to show to them as an example of like, hey, this is what's possible. That, you can be doing this. And it's just phenomenal. Okay, we're going to enter into Act 2 of the show, and that's where we focus on one of your amazing documentary films. For today's podcast, we're going to talk about Losing Sight of Shore, which I believe happened 6 years yesterday, right? What I read?
6 years yesterday, they left the dock in San Francisco. So it's like production formally began 6 years ago.
Yeah. So yeah, and for everyone, for anyone who hasn't seen the film, you need to see it. We will link to it here, but it's about, a small group of women, who basically rowed across the Pacific from California to Australia. Just an incredible, harrowing journey, inspiring cinematic achievement, in my opinion. And I just want to congratulate you on making the film. And I think the great thing about documentaries is that they do stand the test of time.
Yeah, that's certainly the hope. It's just so fun to even still be talking about it. It's, I finished this film in, late 2016. It came out on Netflix May 1st, 2017. So here we are in almost May 2021. I mean, it's just like this the gift that keeps on giving, this story, truly, because I can't believe it happened. It was like such a miracle that it even happened and that it was captured and that all the footage safely went from camera to hard drive to my hands. And then it was all put together. It's just the whole thing just makes me feel really empowered of what's possible. And I hope that the audience feels that way too. That's the whole point. It's really not a film about, hey, you should row an ocean. It's really, no, that's fine. You don't need to. It's really about, we all have a Pacific to cross. That's the tagline of the film. And that's the metaphor that I held on to while making it, is that I was crossing my own Pacific. I was not on the boat with them. Even if I had wanted to be on the boat with them, it wasn't possible. So I couldn't be on the boat with them. So talk about remote directing. I was like pandemic remote directing before it was cool. This was like directing from 8,000 miles away. So yeah, it's a wonderful experience to reflect back on.
Yeah. And just stepping back, how did you get involved with the project?
Yeah, so my first feature documentary is called The Empowerment Project, and it's all about inspiring women all over the United States, like a pilot, athlete, astronaut, mathematician, all these incredible women. So I would just finish that film. This was early 2015. I was like in no way looking for another project. You know how filmmakers are very tired after making a film. They're like, oh, leave me alone. I just need to like bask in the glow of what I've done. Leave me alone. And people are like, what are you making next? And you're like, really?
Yeah.
Can I just relax? But I got this email, and that's just how this goes, right? It's never at a convenient time. The best ideas, the like golden tickets that land in your lap, if they ever do, are never at a convenient time. So that certainly was my story. I got an email late January 2015 from this wonderful blogger in the UK. Her name's Fiona, and she had interviewed me about my first film, so she knew kind of what my mission was and what I was interested in. And she just sent this very innocent email that said, hey, Sarah, I just heard about these 4 women. They're known as the Coxless Crew, and they're about to set off on this hopefully record-setting journey across the Pacific Ocean. Thought you might want to know about it. Like, bye, Fiona. I was like, what? You don't do that to a filmmaker. I mean, it was just this bomb dropped in my inbox. And I do reflect on this email all the time because it was one of those things where I could have walked right on by and been like, good for them. I don't know anything about rowing. This is so not for me. Like, they're crazy. Okay, I'm busy, and gone back to my like very busy day before kids when I thought I knew what busy was. And so I ended up Skyping with 2 of the rowers the next day with no expectation, just thinking like maybe they want to know what GoPro to buy, or surely someone is telling this story. Like, I genuinely in my heart was like, there's no way that they don't already have a filmmaker on this story. This is too extraordinary. And lo and behold, they didn't. And that tags back to the problem that we talked about before. It's like that representation of women's stories. It's like, nobody was all in with them. And so even though I had no idea, I cannot express this enough, how I had no idea how I was going to pull this off, how I was going to fund it, how I was going to shoot it. People row across oceans. I knew nothing, absolutely nothing. I was like, this is so extraordinary. Somebody has to tell that story, and I guess it's going to be me. It started slowly. I shared my first film with them so that they could get to know me as a filmmaker and kind of what my tone would be, what my style would be. I interviewed them over Skype because they were in England and I was in California, so it's not like we could meet in person. And it was only 3 very, very short months later that I was standing on the dock in San Francisco watching them row away, literally 6 years ago. And I had given them cameras and hard drives and microphones so that they could tell their own story at sea, because they were going to be completely isolated in the middle of the Pacific. No camera boat, no follow boat. Part of the record that they were setting was that they were unsupported, meaning none of those support systems. And yeah, it was a huge leap of faith, of course, on their part, but also on mine as the filmmaker, not knowing if the money I had invested would ever come back to me, if they would film anything, if they would a week in be like, this sucks, and turn around. Like, I just knew nothing. So yeah, that's really how it started.
Well, listen, the film is phenomenal for those of you that haven't seen it. I had not seen it, Sarah, so I was sucked in. I found myself cheering for certain people. Emma became my favorite. And then when they turned around the first time, and I don't want to go too deep, but was there moments when you thought, hey, this isn't going to happen? Like, this whole thing's going to stop?
I mean, almost every day. Is that a proper answer? I was certainly terrified the whole way, because I just couldn't believe. Now, keep in mind, they're rowing 24 hours a day, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, for what ended up to be 9 months. Originally, the journey was to take 6 months, but it took 9 because that's what it took. And so about 16 days in, so they leave San Francisco, April 2015. 16 days later, they have to turn into Santa Barbara, which is sort of like our first, almost like plot point of Act 1, if you will. And at the time, I was like, oh no, is this it? Like, was that a trial run and now they're going to have to start over, or they're going to do this again in a year? Like, the boat had some flaws to it that they had to fix. So it was very scary at that time, but it actually was really exciting because I live in Los Angeles and they were left from San Francisco, and now they were going to be in Santa Barbara, which is even closer to where I live, only an hour and a half away. So it's not like it's not like I'd been with them in England and then 2 weeks later I had to go back to England or something. It was so convenient to be like, okay, I will see you in Santa Barbara in an hour and a half. And so it actually served as a great trial run for everybody. So essentially they had to start over from Santa Barbara. It's actually further away somehow than from San Francisco in terms of currents and tides to Hawaii, which is where they were headed for their first leg stop. And so when they came in, they were in great spirits. I think they were all just like happy to kind of have this reset. And I got to watch all the footage that they had shot in the first 16 days, which was terrible. So it was really great to reset because they'll be the first one to admit it. They just didn't get, I mean, the cameras are very easy to use. I'd given them 2 GoPros to kind of put on all different spots on the boat. But I'd also given them this really great camera. It's called the Sony FDR-AX100. And it's a consumer camera. It shoots in 4K compressed. And they can literally just like open up the LCD screen and point it at themselves and it would be beautiful. But they would often forget to turn on the microphone that I had put on top, like a little Sennheiser. All they had to do was like flip it to on. That is a huge obstacle, apparently. So there was a lot of footage with no audio. So, it's like, oh, okay. Or they forgot to focus or put it on autofocus or whatever. So I'm so grateful that they actually had to turn into land because I watched through all the footage and I was like, all right, let's have a refresher here. So we went back through all of the equipment. And not only that, the footage that they had shot, although it was very beautiful at times because the ocean is very beautiful, or sunsets, etc. They had whales that were jumping out of the water. I mean, some of it was amazing. The footage that they were filming was very, excuse the pun, surface level. Like the wind is this, the currents are that, the weather. It was all just like matter of fact. And I had to impress upon them to really think like storytellers and to really think about those other layers. And I'm so grateful we had 9 months of footage. Ultimately, it wasn't just like a 3-week journey because they really became storytellers. They really became filmmakers. And I had to impress upon them, like, I don't really care what the weather is. Like, I could look that up. What I want to know is who are you and why are you taking this journey and how are you interacting as friends and what does this mean to you? Like, why does anyone sign up for something so insane as this? So that took a while to get to those deeper levels. Nobody who's unnatural on camera just picks up the camera and is like, I'm feeling very vulnerable today. Like, people don't talk like that. So I really had to get close with them. I mean, I wanted to anyway, but for director and subject, if you will, to get closer as we got to know each other. I was there every time they were on land for about a week or so. So the closer that we got, the closer they got to the camera on the boat. And that was really kind of my superpower, was like being this like invisible 5th member of the team. And so they would pick up the camera and they would be like, hey, Sarah, this is what's happening today. And I'm feeling really sad, or like, I really want to go home, or this sucks. Like, or just like, I'm feeling really triumphant, whatever. Like those other layers that I felt like were totally missing in those first 16 days. So it was actually a huge blessing to have that reset. And any good documentary filmmaker will tell you, I think tagging back to my dad, he always tells me, if you make the film you set out to make, you did it wrong. And I think that's the perfect piece of advice for any filmmaker, because you think like, oh no, it's not going how I planned. And it's like, great, welcome the changes, welcome the shift. Like, that's real life, And so Losing Sight of Shore was the ultimate lesson in just like go with literally the flow, because the film will be better for it. So that was always, I was pivoting, evolving, just sort of trying to understand what was happening and not getting too caught up in what I think it should be, because that's not real. That's not real life.
I mean, that's crazy. You definitely did feel the emotion in the film. Just such a hard journey to literally crew from California to Australia. I know that there was a gentleman that helped them on their journey. Tony, yeah. Were you able to communicate it all through him? Were you able to communicate to them at all on the boat? I just know it's so unique as a filmmaker. We're used to being there. We're used to being on location, on site. For you to be able to not be there, was there any communication at all with the women while they were on the? I mean, really, it was a canoe. It was a high-tech canoe,
a 1-ton canoe, I guess.
A 1-ton canoe. I mean, pretty incredible.
Yes, Tony Humphreys was my lifesaver, because he was on land, I believe, in the UK the whole time. So I could call him and talk to him, and he knew exactly where they were at all times. He was in communication with them the most. But what was really cool about this whole process was that every day I could go on their website and I could see their GPS tracker that was updated every 4 hours. So I could go on and see like, okay, where are they in the world? You know, where are they on the ocean? How much progress have they made today? And sometimes that was so heartbreaking because they would make, like, let's say they would exert themselves the equivalent of like 50 miles rowing, but only go 2 in the right direction because they had goals, right? They're heading from San Francisco to Hawaii, Hawaii to Samoa, Samoa to Australia. And so that would happen a lot where the boat would drift or, yeah, it was just heartbreaking to see them exert themselves so much and yet not make progress. So those were the days where you're like, are they ever going to get there? Like, is this even possible? And so Tony, I would constantly be checking in with him being like, when do you think we should book our flights to Samoa? And he's like, hold tight. You know, like I'm not booking a plane ticket to the island of Samoa until like 2 days before. That is so expensive and inconvenient to be so last minute. So this was kind of a producer's nightmare in that sense because nothing was set. It was like, I think I'm going to be in Samoa around September, and then I went on Halloween. Like, it was just so, you just never knew. I had to completely like throw up my hands with my life this whole 9 months, just like whatever happens, happens. And so not only was their GPS tracker updated every 4 hours, but they actually blogged every day, this was also my lifeline. So they had an iPad on the boat, which had, you know, minimal power. Of course, they had many things to power through their solar panels. So the sun would power their solar panels. They made their own water on the boat. They did have an iPad. And in the Notes app on the iPad, they would each take turns once each day. So 4 people, they'd take turns. And they'd write a blog post in the Notes app on their iPad. And then when they had internet, they had this device called the Iridium Go. They would upload that blog post to their social media manager person, and they would post it on the website. So if you can believe it, 257 days at sea, 257 blog posts. They didn't miss a day.
Wow.
Unbelievable. Yeah. And thank goodness, because then I could also go on the website and be like, here's where they are, here's the progress. And here, okay, for example, Emma is writing today about how she's struggling and she wants to give up, or she's like fallen out of love with rowing. Oh my God, this is so important to Emma's story. This is really great. But then you got to remember, as a filmmaker, that doesn't mean it was captured at all. So just because it's in the blog and is real and true does not mean it's reflected in the footage. So for me as the director, then I'm reading that and I go and I immediately email Emma and I say, please answer these 10 questions about, I saw your blog post today. I'm sorry you're going through that. Here are 10 questions to go with it. Please, you know, use the camera in the cabin and answer.
So you did have a little bit of back and forth, whether via email, mostly through email with the women?
Mostly through email. They did call me on my birthday because they're amazing human beings. And then because I worked on Dancing with the Stars, I was like dipping my toe back in at that time. And I went and worked on the show when Nick Carter from the Backstreet Boys was on the show. And I only mention this because Laura Penhall, the team lead, is obsessed with Nick Carter from the Backstreet Boys. So I got him to record a message for her. Nice. And I was like, oh, these women are out in the middle of the ocean rowing and they love you. And he was like, what? And so I was like, please just say hi to Laura. And so I emailed her and said, I have a very special surprise for you. And so she called me and I played her the message and she couldn't really hear it. But I got to play it for her later. And she was so excited that Nick Carter even knows she exists. So that was a real treat. So yeah, we had a little bit of communication, but those blogs were totally my lifeline. And then but also keep in mind, I'm asking them to do these interviews and I have no idea if they're doing them, if the sound was on, if it was in focus until like 2 months later when I'm actually getting the hard drive and reviewing the footage. So I'm just like, okay, I have no idea if I'm going to have a movie on the other end of this until I have a movie. Like, it was a lot of risk.
You did a really good job humanizing and telling each of their stories. Like I said, you find yourself, you know, cheering for one or just learning about them. Like, there's no way I thought Emma was going to break. And then when you tell that story, I was like, there's no way. I would have picked one of the other ones. But my question to you really is, I love Seth to death, but after 3 days, I'd be ready to kill Seth. Like, did they fight? Was there anything? Like, I didn't see any of that in the film. Did it not happen?
You know, everyone always wants to know if they fought, which I totally get. They really didn't. And here's why. First of all, if they had, I don't know if I would have wanted to include it because I don't want to perpetuate this like catfight stereotype. I didn't want to make the Real Housewives at sea, but I'm here to promise you that they really didn't fight. And the reason for that is because they trained extensively psychologically prior to the row as well as physically. So they worked with us, and I wasn't able to include a lot of this in the film. They worked with a sports psychologist, this wonderful guy named Keith, and he helped them come up with this like coded system of communication. So if they were frustrated, they said so right away. I mean, maybe men are more socialized to act this way, but for women, it's more like maybe more passive aggressive. Maybe you hold it in, maybe you like never bring it up. But this was totally the opposite, at least for how we're typically socialized as women. It was like, if you're frustrated, say so immediately, nip it in the bud, get over it, because you need each other so desperately. You literally cannot cross the ocean without one another. Like, what an incredible team building exercise every day. So they certainly got lonely and sad and frustrated. But in terms of fighting, the one fight that they did have, which they talked about in the blogs, was over a cup of noodles. It was really just about food. It was like they found some noodles in the bottom of the boat that they had like stashed away. And then there was this whole argument about how much each person should get based on what they already had rationed. It was a whole thing. But otherwise, they really didn't, which it was just adds to the extraordinary nature of the journey. And then I really liked how, for those who haven't seen the film, the boat had sort of, let's say, 4 seats on it, if you will. So there were 3 women who rode the entire journey from California to Australia, and then just imagine sort of 1 seat on the boat rotating. So when they got to Hawaii, they swapped one member, Izzy, for Lizanne, and then when they got to Samoa, they swapped Lizanne for Meg. So they had a new person each leg, which I think really helped them as well. Not just get in like a click mode or have their patterns, like to have a fresh person on the boat, seeing it all for the first time, trying the food, seeing the sunsets, being afraid of night rowing, like all of that stuff, to be able to share with someone new, I think gave them a great kind of refresh every leg too.
Yeah, and I thought Lizanne brought a new energy, and for that second leg, which was, oh man, that second leg was brutal.
It was supposed to take 60 days approximately from Hawaii to Samoa, and it took 97 days. They were literally in the doldrums. Like, people use that phrase all the time. They're like, in the doldrums. They literally had to row through the actual doldrums to get to Samoa. So just unbelievable. When they crossed the equator, so emotional. And I definitely worried that they would be done in Samoa because they were so exhausted and because that second leg was so harrowing. I certainly wondered when I saw them in Samoa, like, are they going to quit? Are they maybe going to do the last leg another time? Like, I definitely was worried about that third leg, but they pulled it out.
Just incredible. I thought your use of animation in the film was fantastic. Talk a little bit about that process. Even from the opening titles to the maps showing the distance and the days and, all that stuff, you really used it as a great storytelling device.
Thank you. Yeah, I worked with a wonderful editor named Peter Seraphim, who I met in film school, actually, at the University of Miami. And he did the opening title sequence and the closing credits. And then I worked with a wonderful animator named Wing, and she did all of the maps. That was an interesting piece to layer in, I have to say, because truthfully, I never came to this film thinking like, I really want to tell a story about rowing. To me, it was really never about rowing. That was just sort of a byproduct of telling a larger story about the power of the human spirit and about friendship. So I didn't want it to be too technical, but I wanted the audience to have enough understanding of the struggle that they went through, where they were in the world, how many miles they were rowing in a day. So we didn't want to be too heavy-handed with the graphics and sort of the placement. I often think that 10 different directors would have taken the exact same footage and made 10 completely different films for this same story. And my sensibility was really less on the technical, less on the rowing, more on the friendship and the human element. So yeah, it was really fun to put those together. And I checked with the rowers several times. I'm like, is this right? Is this right? Did I get all the numbers right? Because I didn't want to mess it up, double checking that it was actually accurate. So that part was really fun.
Yeah, it just really gave you a great sense of, California to Hawaii, Hawaii to Samoa, and then Samoa to Australia, and how hard that was, and going through the equator and just showing all that on the maps. I thought was really well done.
Thanks.
Fundraising for the film, how did that happen?
Oh my goodness, AJ. It was such a struggle. The thing about this film is like there was no shortage of interest. Everywhere I pitched it, people were like, oh, that sounds incredible. Great, I'm glad you're doing that. And I was like, cool. But no one would write me a check, It was just really, there was just so much risk involved. It was like, let me know when they make it. And I was like, really? How am I going to get there? Like, it just, as a filmmaker, it was like, I've got it. I have the access. This is an extraordinary story. Once in a lifetime, they're going to make it. But it's just, every production company, every distributor just wanted to know once they had made it. And so that was really, really difficult for me. So I invested a lot of my own money, which I don't recommend. But in this case, it went very well. I had to, because as I mentioned, I only had 3 months until they were there on the start line. So if I wanted this project to happen, I had to put in my own capital at first. Then I brought on some investors, which I hadn't done before. So this very much felt very entrepreneurial in spirit, starting a whole new LLC for the project, getting an investor agreement, really understanding what it means to have investors and how to create a product that can get them money back. So I brought on some investors, and then I applied for several grants throughout the whole life cycle, like 2 years it took to make the film. I was rejected from 10 grants before I got my first one, and it wasn't until we were in post-production. So it's just like, then everyone was interested. Once it was done, once they had made it, it was like, oh, hey, Sarah, I saw that they made it. And I was like,
Now you got to pay up.
They did, And then you've made it that far. You're like, do I really need you? They made it across the entire ocean. So by the time I was in post, I felt really great. I mean, I just clawed tooth and nail to get this project across the proverbial and actual finish line. So I finally got some grants when I was in post-production, one of which was from the Tribeca Film Institute, which sadly I think has been defunded due to the pandemic, but they have a grant called the All Access Grant. It's $10,000, which of course helps. But beyond that, they brought me to the festival to pitch the film as part of like a distribution market. And that was a game changer for me. I pitched the film 30 times in 2 days to distributors and financiers and grant organizations, sales agents, film festival programmers. And that ultimately led to a little bit more funding, but more importantly, a sales agent. And that company helped me sell the film to Netflix. So it was like a huge dream come true. It had been such a long, difficult road. The film was 100% done when we pitched it to Netflix, and they licensed it for 3 years worldwide. I'll never forget that email from my sales agent. I was in New Zealand actually at the time, and it was like, I mean, if you can imagine, so just to walk you through, so I'm 2 years in, I'm like 50 grand of my own money in this film that over 2 years, I mean, it was just like I was all in. And I had no idea if anybody would even want to watch this film. Do people care about rowing for 90 minutes? I don't know. Have I made complete trash or like something amazing? You just have no idea when no one's seen it. I applied to Sundance, got rejected from Sundance. Of course, it's very hard to get into Sundance. I have no celebrity executive producer. I've got no festival premiere, nothing. And my sales agent sent the film to Netflix. This was December, and I'm thinking to myself, it's December. Like, everyone's like packing it in for the year. We're not going to hear back. Like, I just was very like, I'm going to go on this vacation that I've been waiting for. I'm going to unplug, and we'll see what happens. And I was just sort of broken, just like at the end of making a film, you're just very broken. And I remember I turned on my phone after it had been off for a long time that day, and I see this email saying, we've got an offer from Netflix. And I just like wept. I mean, it was just it was exactly what I wanted for the film. Like, Netflix was my number one choice. And so they ended up licensing the film for 3 years worldwide. So it was in 190 countries, subtitled in 25 languages. I was able to pay my investors back, pay myself back, finally pay myself a salary. I hadn't made a penny in 2 years working on this film. And most importantly, I was going to be able to share this extraordinary story with the world, which was the whole point, so that anybody could be inspired by their journey. So that was really the most exciting part. And so May 1st, 2017, it premiered on Netflix, and it was on for 3 years. It was a licensing deal. So the film is also now on iTunes. I think it might have been pulled from Amazon, actually, because Amazon just did this whole purge of documentaries, unfortunately. But it is available on iTunes, and it's just been such a wild ride. I mean, it's just been so amazing to they believe so deeply in their ability to take this journey. So I believed in them, and then I believed in myself because they believed in me. Like, it was just this beautiful exchange. And then to have this outcome was just like the best possible confirmation that it was the right decision to jump in and to tell this story. So yeah, it was a very happy ending.
I'm very happy.
Yes.
Awesome story, awesome experience. I think we, as people that look up to you, can definitely learn from that, and our listeners and everybody. I mean, it's just awesome. Stepping back a second, how did you, obviously you have these GoPros, you have these handy cams, you have a bunch of mishmash of footage. How did you organize the footage? How did you, kind of go through it? How did you deal with it? You touched on it briefly, but kind of want to talk about that post-process a little bit.
Yeah, so every time they got to land, I was given the slightly damp hard drives that had been in this like Pelican case. We had the lacy hard drives that are kind of water resistant, but certainly not waterproof. So I would take the hard drives and I would look through the footage immediately and then copy it like 3 times. And that was really part of the directing process for me, was to watch every frame. So even if I had had the budget to hire an assistant editor, which I didn't, I wouldn't have passed on that task, truly, because to watch the footage was to understand what their journey was about and what they went through. And so I'm here to tell you, I watched every frame of like 500 hours of footage. It's not like it was Big Brother style where they were filming 24 hours a day. We just didn't have the bandwidth for that. So they were very intentional with what they were filming, but it was still 9 months of that. But luckily, like, for example, when I got to Hawaii, I'm getting all the footage from San Francisco to Hawaii. So it's not like I got all the footage once they got to Australia. I could kind of in between. Then when they're on their way from Hawaii to Samoa, that's when I'm watching through the footage from the first leg and preparing to go to the next destination, fundraising, all of that.
Now, did they give you like verbal cues, like this is day 25, this is day 26, like chronologically, how did you know like what went together? And then the other thing I know, GoPro footage is usually usually the cameras die or don't last very long, and
it just goes for like 30 minutes. Yeah.
Or it's like it's like one still photo of someone's face.
There's a lot of that. Certainly.
And it did seem like, I just want to mention, I think it was Natalia. Did Natalia kind of take control of that situation on the boat? I wanted to kind of ask you about her experience, and it seemed like she really took ownership of directing cameras and doing that sort of thing on the boat.
Yeah, Natalia was certainly my liaison on the boat. She had a photography background in some sense. She's a great photographer. And so she really took ownership of making sure all the equipment would be charged, downloading the footage. That was really part of her, daily task on the boat. But at the same time, the cameras were like lowest on the priority list of what to charge. So if they had limited solar power panel, like cameras were going to be kicked off the list. So she did a great job of like reminding everybody to interview themselves. She got great shots. So she and I were always, as much as we could be, in communication. And I'm so grateful to have had her on the boat because she was really kind of running it. And then, with the footage, I had a Google Doc essentially for each leg, each week of each leg. And I literally logged all of the footage. So if it was like an interview about something that I knew wouldn't really relate, I wouldn't transcribe it. But otherwise, I was, back to my Dancing with the Stars story assistant days. I'm like logging all the footage using keywords that I learned on Dancing with the Stars, which really helped me, of like frustrated in all caps or like good shot, having these sort of codes for me to use so that when I was working with my editor, he would be like, ooh, we need just like a good sunset shot here. And I would be able to type in like sunset and find a whole list of them. So I kind of came up with my own logging system. And then in Adobe Premiere, we had different sequences to organize the footage as well. So we'd have like a whole sequence of sunset shots, a whole sequence of wildlife, a whole sequence of dancing, whatever. We really just tried to categorize it as much as we could per leg so that we could, once we had the story structure down, we could really kind of layer in the B-roll. And this was the kind of film where you are just tripping over the greatest B-roll of all time. And it was so much fun to edit this film because it was like, oh, did you need a shot of a whale? I have 3. Like, it was like, oh, did you want a pretty sunset? I got 10. Like, it was just like so fun to put together.
The cinematography.
So colorful, beautiful. Yeah.
For them to shoot it themselves and to capture the beauty that they did was, very impressive.
Yeah. So, and then the GoPros, I actually would draw pictures of the boat when I was in my office and dry. I would draw pictures of the boat and be like, okay, we've had the camera here and here. We need to mix it up. We need to do something different. And so I would write them an email and be like, hey, why don't you put the GoPro on the end of your oar and then row for 10 minutes with it on the end of the oar? Or like, why don't you open up the hatch and put the camera in and then close the hatch and then open it and take out your food? Just like it was kind of film school 101, like giving them ideas of different angles. Because otherwise they would just like put it at the front, press record, and it would be the same boring rowing shots for like an hour of just them in different swimsuits. It was like, okay, well, that's not going to cut it. We need like dynamic footage. And so with the drone shots, that's another part. They did not have a drone on the boat. This was our only movie magic part, was that all of the drone footage was shot within 12 hours of shore. So whether they were leaving or they were coming back, that's when we got all of the drone footage. And then we peppered it throughout the film because there was just no way to give them a drone. It would have crashed immediately. And then we just wouldn't have had any drone footage at all. So yeah, we always, either I was on a boat with the drone operator or the drone operator was on land filming out because the drone can go about a mile. And so we'd kind of film them as they were coming into land.
Yeah, those are nice transitional shots to have.
Yeah, I thought the drone shots were money. And then also the wildlife. When you guys started with the whales on the first day, I'm like, oh, this is going to be like National Geographic.
Yeah, right.
I saw some of the underwater shots. Did you have a lot of that? Were you selective in when you would use it and when you wouldn't use it, as you were saying?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there's a couple shots where you're seeing like their boat a little bit far away from underwater. That's again when we were close to them, close to land. So we did a little bit of cheating in that way where we'd like get under the boat. Because I never got to get a shot of like being far underwater looking up at the boat, sort of as this like tiny silhouette on the water. Like shots like that just weren't possible unless I had been a diver, going under. So we did what we could to get as much under the boat as possible to kind of, I just wanted to remind the audience as much as possible how tiny they were in comparison to this massive ocean. And originally I thought, okay, maybe we don't want drone footage because we really want the audience to feel claustrophobic and maybe even a little seasick. And then it was like, that's not a good idea. That's too boring. So it just was like seeing this tiny pink dot and this pink boat in this massive ocean, I wanted to pull back so people could remember how isolated they were as much as possible.
Well done.
I wanted to ask about Andre Day's Rise Up at the end.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, chill bumps moment in the film. Perfect placement of the song. Is there a good story behind that song? Did they gift it to you? Did you have to license it? How did that work out?
I definitely had to license it. I mean, I just listened to it this morning. It is still like the most motivational song to me, even when I'm just running. Now, of course, it has all these layers. But I actually heard that song for the first time, hilariously enough, on The Biggest Loser. I was watching The Biggest Loser in, I guess it would have been 2015. And I heard that song and I was like, what is this? This is amazing. And it just stayed in my head. And I was like, that has to be for the end of the movie. That has to be for their triumphant ending. It's so perfect. I didn't know it was going to continue to be this incredibly popular song, but of course it is. It's been used in so many things. But yeah, I worked with a great music supervisor, Larissa, and with her help, we just kind of climbed the rungs and the channels. It is so complicated to license a song. I had no idea, between the record label, the artist, the musicians. Oh my God. So it cost me about $10,000 for one song, which apparently was a bit of a deal, but I had to have it. And I'm so grateful. And by the way, I was like licensing that song, not knowing about Netflix yet. So you sort of have to license it for the best case scenario and say, I hope that this is going to be distributed worldwide, but I don't know yet.
Perpetuity.
And so, that was a huge win. And once you edit it in and you love it, you're like, well, how am I going to find something else? This is perfect. It was worth the money to have that one song. And then the rest of the film is scored beautifully by my composer, Jillian Abud. So yeah. Yeah.
The music was really well done. The score was fantastic. She did a great job. Yeah. Did she ever see the film or?
Oh, I doubt it. Yeah, no.
Okay.
I wish she would.
Yeah.
She's incredible. Yeah.
She would love it.
Your tagline was what Pacific that you had to cross. And so I wanted to ask you naturally, what is the Pacific that you have to cross? But I guess you mentioned earlier, it was this film, huh?
Certainly. I think any filmmaker will agree, every film is its own Pacific, right? You start sort of like you're waiting out a little bit, like, this could be cool. Yeah, maybe I'll do it. And then you just all of a sudden find yourself in the middle of the ocean, like, oh my God, how am I going to fund post-production? How am I going to distribute this? Who's going to watch it? It's very scary and empowering at the same time to go on these journeys of making something. So certainly every film I make is a Pacific to cross. And now as a mom of 2 kids, I certainly feel like many days I'm looking for shore. I'm just like, what happened? What happened to my life? What's going on? And you're sort of treading water for a while. But yeah, I love that tagline because I never wanted people to watch Losing Sight of Shore and think, oh, wow, I could never do that, or I'm so lazy. That some people say that, of course, but it's really never about that. Most of us, 99.9% of us, are never going to row across the Pacific Ocean. That's not the point of any ocean, not the point of the film. It's really about what is your Pacific, and take some inspiration from what these women did and use it as a metaphor for all of the journeys that we all take in our lives. And in a lot of ways, the last year for everybody, this pandemic has been quite a Pacific to cross. And hopefully we're coming to the other side now with vaccines and the world starting to open up a little. So we actually had like a reunion right before the film left Netflix in May 2020. We had like a Zoom reunion with all the rowers and me, and it was just so fun to be back together. And we were just joking like they were the ultimate in quarantine. Like they were completely isolated and in quarantine for 9 months. So this was all like, yeah, we know what's up. We know how to do this. So they are the experts in how to be quarantined for an extended period of time. So
yes, they are.
Yeah.
Quite an achievement, a human achievement, a cinematic achievement. Was there, as far as the final edit of the film, was there any back and forth with the women as far as getting their opinions on the final cut?
Thankfully, no. I mean, I shared it with them as a rough cut, I remember. And again, this is all before Netflix is just like, let's finish the film. I think they just loved watching it. I think for them, it was like already kind of foggy in their brain. Like, did we all really do that? So I'm very sentimental. So I like had them Skype me when they were watching it. That's me. I'm just like, I want to watch you watch it. So I got to see them watch it, which was so amazing. And just seeing their reactions, and I think they were just delighted that it turned out the way that it did. And, I'm sure there were moments where they were like, ooh, I don't like the way I looked there, or whatever, all of our own hangups. But overall, they were so happy with it. And then it was just a matter of like, is this accurate? Like, does this really tell your story? But you have to remember that the film is 92 minutes long, and one shift on the boat, is 2 hours on the boat. So the film isn't even the length of one shift on the boat. So I could never possibly encapsulate their whole experience. So I think they're just glad that this is like some kind of time capsule of what they went through, and they're grateful that it exists, because otherwise I think the brain kind of pushes it aside. Like, did that really happen? It's just been really, really fun for them too, to share their story and to be on panels and do podcasts and go to screenings. We did like a whole screening tour right when the film was coming out on Netflix all over England and South Africa. And that was really fun to like be all back together. So yeah, they were just really, really pleased with how it came out. And then when it was on Netflix, I think they just couldn't believe how many people would respond to it and tweet them. And it's just been such a joy.
That's awesome. And definitely a perk of making your own film. You get to make your own film, no notes.
Yeah, that is true. When we licensed to Netflix, I was wondering how that works. Like, if it was a Netflix original, if they had bought all the rights, they could have certainly given notes or had edits. But because they were licensing it, it was really exciting for them to be like, yep, we'll take it. I was like, really? I don't have to change anything? Okay, great. Like, that was like, felt like the ultimate compliment for a filmmaker to be like, yes, we will have exactly what you created. I was like, okay.
Yeah. What a feeling that phone call is. Well, that was a masterclass on documentary filmmaking in itself right there. Losing Sight of Shore. Definitely check that film out. It stands the test of time, and it's one of the great achievements out there. Want to get into Act 3 real quick, just some quick hitters. AJ, you want to start us off?
Sure, but first off, I echo that was a mattress class. Northwestern's lost our game. I appreciate that.
Definitely Northwestern's lost.
Northwestern's lost.
You can have dinner with one filmmaker. Who is it?
Ooh, Ava DuVernay.
Oh wow, you were ready. Why?
Oh my gosh, she's done so many incredible projects. I love that she does narrative and documentary. Her social impact is just so widespreading. She didn't start until she was in her 30s after, being in PR for so long. She made 8 films before she got one, well-funded. She's just an inspiration through and through.
I think that dinner can happen. One piece of advice for someone who wants to make a documentary film, and it can't be just do it. It has to be something else.
Okay. Don't wait for permission or for a feeling of being ready, because I feel like that's a common misconception. I never feel ready completely or smart enough or prepared enough for any of these projects. I just get started and I see how it feels, and then I take a little bit more, many more steps, and it's scary to get started, but you gotta just sort of take the leap and figure it all out, like sort of get the train moving, and then you'll see how to get other people on board with you. I think that's common misconception about documentary filmmaking, is that you have it all planned out or you have it all funded from the start. Definitely not. It's an evolving art form, which is why it's great.
It's interesting here. We usually ask your favorite sports doc, but I'm going to change it up with you and ask your favorite doc, or the types of docs that you would recommend are light.
Ooh, okay. Oh, there's so many good ones. One that sticks out to me, I don't know why I'm thinking of this one right now, but I really like stories about like extraordinary people, you know, just sort of like stranger than fiction kind of stories. And one that I really enjoyed was Three Identical Strangers, about these triplets that reconnected later in life. Just this stranger than fiction sort of feeling. McMillions was an incredible series on HBO. I watched all of that recently, and I was just blown away by the cinematic quality and the storytelling. I'm just so inspired by all of the tools that documentary filmmakers get to use, from animation to reenactment to music to graphics. It's really, really an exciting time to be a filmmaker in any regard, but certainly in the documentary field, there's just like an explosion of art forms within the same medium, and that's been really cool. I have so many films I admire, but those two kind of stick out.
How does being a mother inspire you as a filmmaker?
Oh my God. In every way possible. My most recent film is called Nevertheless, and it's all about sexual harassment in the workplace. I made that film completely dedicated to my daughter, Bryce. I started making it when I was pregnant with her, and I just felt this tremendous responsibility to help make the world a safer place for her and all girls and women to exist in. And so that was a really, really tough film to make emotionally, to hear a lot of pain, a lot of, struggle, but having this sort of North Star of like, we have to make the world better for our children, thinking about my daughter and not wanting her to face those same things that I've faced and that so many women I know have faced. Yeah. And now I have a son, so I feel like that's sort of permeating my thought as well. I want to tell a lot more stories about motherhood. I really want to examine like gender roles, gender stereotypes, and just my work sort of influences my parenting. And now I feel like my parenting is going to also influence my work. So yeah, it's sort of, how do you untether from being a parent once you are one? You just kind of...
Here comes the Chicago Cubs documentary. Here we go.
Oh, gosh.
What's your dream doc? Or is there one that you're like, hey, I really want to tell X story?
Right now, there's so much going on with mothers, with parents, especially due to the pandemic. More women have left the workforce in the last year. It's been called the she session. And that really breaks my heart. And sort of this idea that all the progress that has been made for women has been lost in the last year, like a decade of progress or something insane has been lost in the last year. So that just makes me want to pick up the camera and go, and it makes me want to tell more stories about mothers. So I'm beginning to develop an idea about motherhood in some form. My first film, The Empowerment Project, involved a road trip across the United States to interview inspirational women. So now I'm sort of percolating on an idea of doing the similar kind of thing, where I get in a minivan, a SUV of some kind with a fellow mother, and we go out and we really start to unpack, like, what does it mean to be a mother in America today? And what are the struggles that mothers are facing, pandemic or not? And that's really kind of speaking to me right now. That would sort of be my dream project right now, is really to like dive into the motherhood experience in all of its complexities.
Get ready, the Winnebago is coming across the country.
Yes.
The kids are coming, the family's coming. It's going to be another special experience by Sarah Moshman. Sarah, you gave us a lot of time. We appreciate it. You're an inspiration to all of us out here, and I want to just thank you for everything.
Thanks for having me on the show, you guys. It was great to talk with you.
Definitely. I enjoyed it.
And that's a wrap.
A big thank you to Sarah Moshman for inspiring us to fight for what we believe in. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. And if you liked what you heard, please share with your friends.
We'll be back next week with another great episode of Beyond the Lens, and that's a cut.
And I'd like to give a special thanks to our editors, Jacob Gorenberg and Andrew Holman, and our production assistant, Candace Evans.